when we go back and look at these slides, let me get out of this one and go up to a new one. Let's go to this one. Is that the one we want to go? No, we don't want to do that one. Let's do this one instead. When we look at this particular slide, and we notice that the Great Tribulation kicks off at the midpoint right here, right, with the abomination of desolation right there in the middle. Then in order for, let me zoom in on this part, in order for God to have time to pour out his wrath, let me erase that one for a second. Need to draw it more exact. There we go. In order for God to have time to pour out his day of the Lord wrath, which includes the seventh seal, all seven of the trumpets, and all seven of the bowls, right, which is all of this time frame right here. In order for time to play all of that out, then we've got to have a great tribulation that is cut short at least 5 months earlier than the end of the 7th week that I showed you earlier, the 1,260 days, counting from the midpoint. And the reason we need that is because the book of Revelation in chapter 9, verse 5, describes the 5th trumpet as having a duration of 5 months, at the very least. We can't get shorter than that because that's taken at face value. That's what it teaches. It could be longer, and I actually believe it will be longer, probably 6 months, maybe even a year. And when I say it, I mean the buffer zone between the end of the 70th week and the end of the tribulation. So we're talking about if this were the end of the 70th week, we're talking about some kind of area in between here, something like that. In my little slide here, it just says Day of the Lord, trumpet, seals, but we don't know how long. Is it going to be this long? Something like that. So let me erase some of that. So that's my point, is we're trying to ascertain how long this time frame is right here. And like I said, I think the Bible gives us some ways to find out. But the persecution of the wrath of God is going to wait until the person of Antichrist is finished. Either let it run its full course and then the wrath of God is poured out, or more likely, like I said in the pre-wrath model, the wrath of Satan will be cut short by the wrath of God, by that rapture. Therefore, Cooper says, like the post-tribbers, I believe that the church will experience the direct persecution of Satan and Antichrist. Let's keep going. I'm going to start accelerating my slides now that I've done all of my extra, explanations. I think I can let Dr. Cooper speak for himself now. Let me, just real quick, let me double check my time, see how we're doing. Okay, we're doing pretty good. We got 22 minutes left in study. All right, Dr. Cooper talks about the 4 legs one more time, right? Remember the illustration of the chair. He says that this is where the pre-wrath position adds the critical 4th leg to the chair. Otherwise, we could stop at post-trib, right? Post-trib's got some decent legs, 3 to be sure, but what are they missing? Dr. Cooper says the Word of God teaches that Satan/Antichrist persecution will be cut short, right? In Matthew 24:22. How? How is it going to be cut short? By removing the object of the evil one's persecution, the church, to heaven and putting the remnant of Israel in protective custody. By the way, all those footnote numbers that you see on my slide here, when we get to the very end, I'll show you what those refer to, but they're just references to books or other commentaries that Dr. Cooper has researched so that you know that this is not just his own position. That's what those numbers, you see 13 and 14 and 15 there. Let's keep going. Dr. Cooper says this one refinement about recognizing that the tribulation will be cut short, amputated is what the original Greek word says. This one refinement makes several things possible. And this is where post-tribbers miss it. All right, this is where the post-tribbers don't get it. In fact, let me go back over to the post-trib slide and you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, in the post-trib model, they've got the Great Tribulation running the full 3.5 years time frame. And in so doing, the church has to be protected from the wrath of God, but not protected from the wrath of Satan. It's not that God couldn't do such a thing, protect his own people from his own wrath, while at the same time pouring out judgment on the wicked inhabitants of planet Earth. He certainly can do that. He did it in Egypt with the Israelites. Everyone remembers the story. If you've watched the plagues, you know that Israel enjoyed a measure of protection while they stayed in Goshen, while the plagues rained down all around them, but Israel was protected in such a way. Could God do that again? He absolutely could do that again. Will he do that again? I don't think he needs to do that again because, again, speculation, assertion, supposition. Why don't I think he needs to do that again? Because we've already got rapture passages. We've already got explicit promises given to us as believers, and that this is the redemption that we should be looking up for and waiting for. It doesn't seem to hint anywhere in the Olivet Discourses that there's going to be this supernatural protection. Indeed, if we take the whole of the Old Testament passages beginning with Daniel and build on the theme that righteousness is persecuted for its stance that it takes, then we can realize that when Daniel promised or foretold, right, prophesied, that the Antichrist would have a measure of success over the righteous people in terms of wearing the saints down, crushing us. And yet, at the same time, when we get to the Apostolic Scriptures and we begin to read the Gospels, we believe that Yeshua's promises to us are that not a hair on our head will perish. We have to take that within the context of a tribulation that destroys our bodies, but does not touch our very soul. And so Jesus, within that context, doesn't tell us to look for some supernatural Goshen-style protection during the Great Tribulation. Instead, again, Luke's rendering does this the best. He says, when you see all of these things begin to happen, and the immediate context is the sixth seal sign, the cosmic disturbances. When you see all of these things begin to happen, look up, for your redemption is drawing nigh. I think it says that at the KJV. So, the refinement that Dr. Cooper is referring to here, the cutting short of the Antichrist, it makes several things possible. Number one, it provides sufficient time for all of God's wrath to occur without manufacturing a way for the church to be present while that wrath rains down all around them. We don't have to create a scenario where God protects us just because he has done it in the past. Again, I'm not trying to say that God couldn't do it. He could. He has that power, and there is precedent for him doing so. My point is, the promises in the Bible about fleeing into the wilderness, that's for national Israel, but it doesn't have any language there about the church in general fleeing into the wilderness. Where would we go? If you're in the middle of the United States, where's the wilderness for you? I don't know how you can apply Revelation chapter 12 to a scenario where you're living in the United States. Clearly, it seems to be Jerusalem specific. So that one doesn't work, because I've heard some post-tribbers try to imagine, well, wait a minute, the Bible talks about fleeing into the wilderness away from the wrath of Satan. By the way, that's fleeing from the wrath of Satan, not fleeing from the wrath of God anyway. So wrong wrath, if you're going to be talking about fleeing from wrath or escaping persecution. It's best to take the words at face value that are already given to us. We, Christians, will suffer persecution, and yet there will be a rescue operation that cuts short that great tribulation. So this cutting short provides sufficient time for all of God's wrath to occur. If I go back over to the post-trib slide that I was looking at, their great tribulation is 3.5 years long, which means where's their rapture? The rapture is at the very end, and in putting it at the very end, it doesn't give enough time here to allow for, I don't like that. Let me take away that. It doesn't give enough time for the rapture to have God's, let's just draw the square again, for God's wrath to be poured out. I mean, there's just not, unless this slide teaches that God's wrath has been running the entire time, for the entire 70th week, if that's what this slide is implying, and this would be classic post-tribs, they would say that's true. There is a version, let me pull it up. It is right, I do have it on this slide, give me a moment. Yeah, here we go. I even have all the circles drawn. This is two versions of the post-trib. One on the top is the classic version that says that the day of the Lord runs the full length of the 7 years, and Christians are just going to tough it out throughout the bad stuff that happens, both from evil, wicked men, Satan, and from God. All of it is day of the Lord. And in so doing, there's a rapture at the far right where that circle is. I forgot to erase this from previous time, so I just left the circles there, left all my drawing. But the one on the bottom is the modified post-trib. Some people call it post-trib pre-wrath. And what it does is it realizes that filling up the entire 70th week with the day of the Lord doesn't fit Scripture. Instead, let's give it back to the Antichrist. So let's just call that 7-year period tribulation, and let's call it, so like this first half might be tribulation, then this last half will be day of the Lord or something to that effect. I'm sorry, not day of the Lord, great tribulation. But notice that, let me get rid of some of this, it's too noisy. Notice that the rapture is at the very end, followed, well, it's too big, let's go like this. Notice that we have our rapture here, followed by the day of the Lord afterwards. And in so doing, at least it allows for the principle of cutting short, or something to that effect. The rapture cuts short the day of the Lord. Cuts short the what we would call the wrath of Satan, which would have been taking place at this time frame, right? The all of that wrath, all of that tribulation time period, all of that first half. At least the rapture cuts that time period short. But notice it leaves the day of the Lord drastically shortened. And so the proper pre-wrath model provides sufficient time for all of God's wrath to occur without manufacturing a way for the church to be present while that wrath raising down all around them. Number two, the pre-wrath position provides the necessary time for the salvation of Zechariah's prophesied 1/3 remnant of Israel, who will be the inhabitants of the millennial kingdom. This is an important detail if you consider that when the church is raptured after the tribulation, the raptured church returns to planet Earth. Of course, in pre-trib fashion, post-trib fashion, they return right after being yanked up into the air, right? They go up and they do the U-turn, they come back down. You guys have heard it described that way. Even though post-tribbers don't like to have their position described as the U-turn position, but functionally speaking, that's what they're talking about. The U-turn puts Christians back onto planet Earth, but with glorified bodies. And in so having glorified bodies, they're not able to populate the millennium because, according to other passages, a glorified body doesn't reproduce. So we know that the millennium will have inhabitants. In fact, at the end of the millennium, per Revelation chapter 22, I believe, or chapter 20, yeah, I think it's chapter 20, the end of the millennium will have so many normal human beings populating that there will be enough for Satan when he comes out of his prison to amass a super huge rebellion, one final push, what I believe is the Gog and Magog war proper, at the very end of the millennium to try to destroy the people of God and the city of Jerusalem that's been resting on planet Earth. Not just the rebuilt Jerusalem, but heavenly Jerusalem, I believe, will also be there during the millennium. I know. Most of you think that heavenly Jerusalem doesn't come down to the very end of the millennium, but we can talk about that a different day. Point being, there's enough normal humans who have a sinful nature that Satan can draw them into one last final rebellion. So where did all those people come from? Here's the problem. If there's no one that enters the millennium with a natural body, because the rapture took place right at the very end of the 70th week, then where did all those natural people come from? Some of you are going to say, well, they're survivors that didn't get destroyed during the 70th week. I'm going to say, yeah, exactly. Survivors such as Israelites who are hiding out, who then do join Yeshua later on, but there's still some Israelites and other natural people that just don't get the picture, and they don't get destroyed by God's wrath, and they don't get, they also don't get killed by Antichrist. They survive. But this, by the way, is in accordance with the pre-wrath position that teaches that if the millennium is going to be full of righteous people, mainly righteous people, then we could say that the millennium was populated by people who were who went into the sheep and goat judgment and came out as sheep, right? Matthew chapter 25. We can factor in that. So point number 2, it provides enough people to go into the millennial kingdom. The point number 3 that the pre-wrath provides is it gives the time necessary for the salvation of a remnant of Gentiles from the nations who refuse to take the mark of Antichrist, the things I've been talking about. So remember, sheep and goat judgment is going to take place. Let me see, do I have a slide that shows this? I do, but it's kind of busy, so you're going to have to bear with me when I bring it into, let's see, is it this one? Give me a moment. I'm off screen looking at different slides. Okay, I'm going to show you a slide. I don't think I've showed you this one before. Nope, I don't even have the slide I'm looking for. So let me just look at this one more time. Sheep and goat judgment, 2 witnesses, Battle of Armageddon, restoration, 45 days. Nah, I don't see it on this slide, so don't worry. Just take my word for it. I'll show you on a different video, different day. Sheep and goat judgment near the very end of the 70th week, Matthew chapter 25. Let's keep going. Therefore, the pre-wrath position stands on 4 solid legs. One leg involves the church's exemption from the wrath of God, which, and here we have Dr. Cooper summarizing what I was trying to do earlier, but wasn't catching. Pre-trib has the truth, a solid leg that teaches that the church is exempt from the wrath of God. That is a solid leg that we need not discard. We've got to hold on to that one, right? Go back over to the pre-trib position, and we can say they've got one leg there. Give me a second. I'm going to leave all that. They got one solid leg there. Mid-trib position is going to build the second leg, right? A leg that consists of a distinction between the wrath of God and the wrath of Antichrist. That's the second leg. That's what mid-trib brings to the picture. So when we go to mid-trib, we've got 2 legs. Okay. Moving along, one leg of these 4 constitutes a distinction between the Great Tribulation and the eschatological day of the Lord. That's post-tribulationalism, right? Post-tribs bring that third leg into the picture in a very important way while not discarding the other 2 legs that pre-tribs and mid-tribs already brought to the table. This is why I said I would really be a post-tribber if it weren't for the pre-wrath position, because the post-trib is the only one that has all of the other 2 solid theologies, and it retains them, yet at the same time doesn't fall prey to the weakness that the other 2 have. Keeping the Christians out of the entire 70th week, in my position, is a weakness, because we don't face off against the Antichrist like we are. I believe that the Scripture clearly teaches that we should. Pre-trib and mid-trib try to keep us away from the Antichrist, and I believe it's because they misunderstand tribulation and wrath. They conflate those 2 terms into one concept, and therefore when they read the passages that teach that God has not appointed us to wrath as his bride, and this is based on a solid principle in Scripture that God wouldn't punish his bride because he's redeemed us. Remember, Yeshua's redemption is not just a redemption, a cleansing of our sins, but it also affords us protection from the ultimate punishment of God. The general principle, the theological truth that we're saved from the wrath of God is foundational. We need not be confused with that particular fact. So the post-tribs bring that third leg to the table, but as Dr. Cooper says, the last leg shows that the persecution of Antichrist will be cut short before the end of the 70th week, providing the interval between the rapture and Christ coming at the Battle of Armageddon, during which time all of the trumpet and bowl judgments sorry, try that one again. There's an interval between the rapture and Christ coming at the Battle of Armageddon, during which all of the trumpet and bowl judgments will be played out. I've got a slide that does show this, so let me bring up this one for a second. if I go over to this slide, we've got a rapture over on the left side of the screen, which initiates the parousia. But then we've got the Battle of Armageddon over on the right side, which culminates the parousia. They're linked together as one parousia, so I don't want you to get confused. It's the second coming, right? It's one second coming. It's one parousia, like I'm highlighting at the very, very top. But what does it include? Let me erase a little bit of that. What does it include? In fact, let me erase all of that so I can see the whole screen. What does the parousia include? You can see here the details that I highlighted with my slide here. The parousia is initiated by the rapture sometime after the midpoint of the week, after the Great Tribulation, and after the sixth seal sign. But God's wrath includes both the trumpets and the bowls, but not the seals. So I believe that's the way to understand what Dr. Cooper's talking about here. So the identification of the wrath of God with the eschatological day of the Lord is the key. All sides agree, all of us agree, that the eschatological day of the Lord involves both the final judgment of God and the deliverance of his saints. Let's go take some quotes from Blazing and Bach. Doctors Craig A. Blazing and Darrell L. Bach, in reference to 2 Thessalonians, have this particular quote. Deliverance in the day of the Lord is a special theme of 1 Thessalonians. At his return, Jesus delivers us from the wrath to come. Paul teaches the church that the day of the Lord will not overtake you like a thief. So I think there might be a second quote here. Yeah. In the context, those two doctors go on to say, this deliverance would seem to be the blessing of resurrection and translation into immortality, which Christ will grant at his own coming. So it's necessary to have a rapture that cuts short the great tribulation of Antichrist. When I go back over to this particular slide, let me chop out that for a second. It's necessary to have the rapture right here, coming of the Son of Man, because it's going to cut short, let me draw a line there, it's going to cut short that persecution, that great tribulation right here, right? We need to cut that short with the coming of the Son of Man, date unknown. And in so doing, let's go back over to this quote. In so doing, this rapture/resurrection is a promise that would appear to coincide with the inception or coming of the day of the Lord, since that is the focus in 1 Thessalonians 5, 2 through 4. So when we go back over to the slide here, you can see that the day of the Lord and the Great Tribulation are separated, right? I'm just drawing a line straight down the middle of my slide so you can see. We've got, all of this over on this side is tribulational type stuff, really rough time on planet Earth, so to say. But then when the day of the Lord happens and all of this stuff begins to happen, when the day of the Lord commences, Christians should have been raptured at that point in time. Again, I know the post-tribbers are going to say, no, we didn't get raptured. We got supernaturally protected, meaning post-tribs believe that we're going to go through all of this time period and get a rapture way over here at the far end, meaning we have to go through all of this right here. All right. The deliverance or rapture would appear to coincide with the inception or coming of the day of the Lord, since that's the focus in 1 Thessalonians. Paul's writing there. Both doctors, this is Cooper speaking once more, both doctors Blazing and Bach taught at Dallas Seminary during Cooper's time of study there. It was from Dr. Blazing that Cooper studied eschatology. Both are solidly pre-trib, yet they recognize the biblical basis for claiming that the eschatological day of the Lord and the timing of the rapture must occur at the same time. In other words, if you go back over to the let me bring up my 4 slides here. When we look at the pre-trib, we can see that the rapture over here is prior to God's wrath. Oh, that's pretty messy. Let's erase some of that. We can see that their rapture is prior to God's wrath being initiated. So notice the same principle. A rapture prior to wrath. Going over to the mid-trib view, we have the same principle. God's wrath is here, and it stands in distinction to the rapture, which is there, right? Post-trib, again, this is classic version here, has, in this particular model that you're seeing, it has God's wrath, occupying all of this time frame, but the church has to be protected supernaturally from that. At least that's in the classic version. Prewrath says, let's just make it clean. Let's just make it the way that the Bible seems to spell it out in the most natural way that Paul is giving it to us. That is, the rapture cuts short the Great Tribulation, and then God's wrath is poured out on planet Earth. The two doctors that Cooper's talking about, they're both solidly pre-trib, yet they recognize the biblical basis for claiming that the eschatological day of the Lord and the timing of the rapture must occur at the same time. Pentecost writes in his book, Things to Come, quote, "The only way this day could break unexpectedly upon the world is to have it begin immediately after the rapture of the church," end quote. He continues, "It is thus concluded that the day of the Lord is that extended period of time beginning with God's dealing with Israel after the rapture at the beginning of the tribulation period, and extending through the second advent and the millennium age unto the creation of the new heavens and the new earth after the millennium." Of course, when he talked about God's dealing with Israel, it sounds very dispensational, and it should, because Pentecost was a dispensationalist. Dr. Cooper provides this as well. Pentecost is obviously pre-tribulational, right? That's where you can hear the flavor of dispensationalism kicking in, where he's talking about, let's just deal with Israel again. However, he too recognizes the necessity that the eschatological day of the Lord follows the rapture. The timing issue can be settled if the beginning of the day of the Lord can be determined within the framework of end-time events. So, the Prewrath position acknowledges that the eschatological day of the Lord will be signaled by a sign given in the sun, moon, and stars, a sign distinctly described in the eschatological book of Joel. And that's why we call it a sixth seal sign, that the rapture will take place between the sixth seal and the seventh seal. So it follows the sixth seal. That sign itself is the sign of both the rapture as well as, you could say, the sign of the impending doom. We also have another sign that I'm not even mentioning at the moment, called the sign of the coming of the Son of Man, that will probably be the supernatural brilliance that follows immediately after the supernatural darkening created by the cosmic disturbances himself. Let's continue. Jesus indicates in the Olivet Discourse that his parousia will immediately follow the sign Joel prophesied, which marks the inception of the eschatological day of the Lord. Continuing, Jesus also indicated in his revelation, remember we're talking about Prewrath now, Jesus also indicated in his revelation to John that Joel's sign of the sun, moon, and stars will be the sign that announces the day in which his wrath begins, a sign given in the heavenlies that will be displayed at the breaking of the sixth seal. I've got a slide here maybe that I can show you that begins to demonstrate this. Where is it? Is it this one? Give me a second. Cosmic disturbances. I suppose this can kind of work for me. If you look at this particular slide, we've got the seven seals of the book of Revelation, starting in chapter 6, Revelation chapter 6. And when we get to the this one right here, the cosmic disturbance sign right there, it is, which coincides with that, right? We can see that it's the Great Tribulation that got cut short, and that the rapture is going to be right there. So when we zoom in, now we have the seventh seal over here, but the rapture is the thing in the middle that separates the sixth seal from the seventh seal. What is that seventh seal? It is the cosmic disturbance. And so this is what Dr. Cooper is referring us to. And this, by the way, is a great way to harmonize and synchronize where the rapture is in regards to other events around it. Let me say it to you in this way. The sixth seal sign comes the sixth seal sign comes prior to the initiation of the day of the Lord per Joel as well as Isaiah chapter 13, I believe. So the sixth seal sign happens prior to that, prior to the day of the Lord, because Joel says basically, the moon will go dark and the sun will not shed its, the sun will go dark, will turn to something that looks like blood, the moon will go dark, stars will appear to fall from the sky. I'm really paraphrasing grossly, but all of this says this will happen before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And so we've got a marker with the sixth seal sign of the impending day of the Lord. But then when we get to Yeshua, he says immediately after the tribulation of those days, Matthew 24:29, the sun will go dark, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky. When we pull in the Luke passage, we find that there'll be a great earthquake as well, which will probably trigger a tsunami. But so it's both a cosmic and a terrestrial sign, a celestial and a terrestrial. Point being is, Yeshua says that immediately after the tribulation of those days, we'll have this sign, and then we'll see the Son of Man coming. So it locates this cosmic disturbance sign both after the tribulation, but prior to the day of God's wrath being poured out. And that's why we can, with certainty, go back over to this slide and get the timing right. Let me erase some of that there. We can show now that Yeshua said immediately after the tribulation of those days, and then Joel says before the day of the Lord. And so that's why we've got the sixth seal sign, meaning the rapture will be right there. That's kind of nice. Let's conclude with Dr. Cooper tonight. Jesus also indicated in his revelation to John that Joel's sign in the sun, moon, and stars will be the sign that announces the day in which his wrath begins, a sign given in the heavenlies that will be displayed at the breaking of the sixth seal. Therefore, as one compares the six seals to the events outlined in the Olivet Discourse, one quickly sees that the rapture must occur after the 70th week of Daniel begins, after the midpoint of that same week has begun, and after Satan, Antichrist's persecution of the church is cut short, Matthew 24:22, when the sign of the eschatological day of the Lord and the parousia of Christ is given in the sun, moon, and stars. The exact day or hour when the sixth seal will be broken is not detailed in the scriptures, Matthew 24:36. So we still have this unknown day or hour. We pre-wrathers are not saying we know when the day will happen. We're simply saying that we have sequencing based on certain passages, but we don't know when that day will be cut short. We don't know, the Great Tribulation will be cut short. We don't know when that sixth seal sign will happen, but we know sequentially it will follow after the fifth, which follows after fourth, which follows after third, things like that, which follows after midpoint. And so there's some markers that indicate sequencing, but we still have this uncertainty when it comes to when will the Great Tribulation be cut short. We don't know that. But when that happens, then it will announce to the entire world the inception of the eschatological day of the Lord. Does the timing component offered by the Prewrath position have incontrovertible biblical support? Well, according to Dr. Cooper, if you search the scriptures, we believe that it does. And thus our four-legged chair is durable, reliable, and practical. Have a seat and test it for yourself. And that'll do it for Dr. Cooper's study. As promised, here are the endnotes 1 through 10. I'll just pause and let you see them. Take a look at them, screenshot them if you'd like to. More endnotes 11 through 19. Again, I'll just pause and let you take a look at them so you can know where Dr. Cooper was getting all of his information. And that'll do it for the Prewrath Rapture written by Dr. Cooper way back in 2015, as is found on Prewrath Resource Institute Incorporated, found online at prewrathrapture.com. And that'll do it for the end of my study. Notice we're at topic 12 that we just concluded with Rapture's use of final analysis. What does it mean? It means next week, we're ready to turn to a new topic called Mystery Babylon, discussion part 1. Yep, we're going to start into that. And that'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end time events.